I'm glad to see you guys again. I think everyone's been here, but for those that haven't or for the recording, my name is Doreen Graham. My mom had Alzheimer's for 5 years. I'm a certified dementia practitioner, and I have my master's in gerontology, so I have just gotten involved with trying to get the word out of trying to help people understand this disease. I wanted to just tell you what's back there. Oops. This little one is the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. That was the first presentation we did. I went by the Alzheimer's office today and was able to pick these up. They just got the order in. So this is just something you can have nearby, just, if there's concerns about anything. This one on communication is what we talked about last time, and it gives you some idea of some of the different things that's happening with communication based on the different stages. And then this one is behaviors, which is going to be what we're going to talk about this afternoon. I would, if you can, there's a lot more information on the website, alz.org, that can go into more detail, like the communication. This is only kind of like a snapshot and the top points, but if you go on the website, you can end up getting more in-depth information for the early stages, the mid stages, the late stages. So this is a good resource, but just, when you have time, go on the website because there's a whole lot more information. And the other thing I printed off, I had gotten this, I did a presentation over the weekend. Well, I didn't. I participated in a Zoom meeting with a group called Alter, which is out of Atlanta, and it actually was talking about Alzheimer's in the African American community because they're African Americans and Hispanics have a higher prevalency of getting Alzheimer's. So I wanted to just listen in to see what any information that I could learn that just kind of helps me and better understand. For this, we're understanding and responding to dementia-related behaviors. And we're hoping by the end of today, you'll have a better idea to identify common triggers for behaviors associated with the dementia. What really we're going to end up trying to talk about is it's almost like you have to be a detective to try to understand what's going on with the individual, because as the disease progresses, it's very hard for them to communicate. And they're not, it's almost like I say, I have a 16-year-old and a 24-year-old. It's almost like going back to having that toddler, and they're not really talking, and then you wish they'd start talking, and then when they start, you wish they'd stop. But this is it, and I think what ends up being so hard is we're looking at our loved one, our neighbor, our aunt, or uncle, or mother, or parent, or sibling, and what's hard is you've got somebody, whether you're whatever age you are, and this is somebody who, my mother was a huge talker. I got it from her. And so then you get someone who doesn't talk anymore, and you're just wondering what's going on, and it's now you really, and what's hard is when you're involved with it, it is so emotionally draining. But my hope is that today you can look at some of this. I think we all have to give ourselves grace and understand we're doing the best we can, but maybe try to learn from what's happened to see if there's a way to make a better situation. I think I've mentioned, before, sometimes they talk about, if you're used to going to the holiday party or the Super Bowl party, or let's say St. Patty's Day is coming up in 2 weeks, that may have been something that they always enjoyed doing, but as the disease progresses, it may end up being too much. And then it ends up, I know I struggle because we're Irish and St. Patty's Day was always a big deal for us. So then it was like we had to make the choice. We can't go to the Irish pub because we knew it wasn't going to work for my mom. And then it's hard because then you're not getting to do what you want to do. But some of what we're going to try to do is see if we can try to identify some of what's happening. You may not be able to do it right then and there, but reflect back. And then maybe you can end up learning something like, maybe if this situation happens again, I can potentially handle things differently. Explain the process for assessing. That's what I was talking about, and identifying challenging behaviors. Again, the behaviors are going to be different for each person. I would say definitely, reach out. There's information on the website, calling our toll-free number. Got it on my wrist, 1-800-272-3900. They are trained and can give you a lot of helpful information if something is coming up. It's 24/7. So if you've racked your brain or you've just had a really hard day and your loved one gets to sleep and you're able to, call the helpline and they'll be able to give you some information. And then try to list some strategies to address common dementia-related behaviors. All right. So our behavioral changes can have many triggers. Sometimes is it pain or discomfort? I know in my mom's situation, we don't know that she ever was in any kind of pain. The other thing would be like discomfort. Is there something with their clothing that's bothering? It's again, go back to that child who sometimes, there's some kids that have that sensory with, tags in their shirt. This may be an individual that never had issues before, but it's almost like you have to take a step back and kind of look what's going on. Because what's happening is that individual, it was still my mom, but those brain changes were happening to her. So it's like she wasn't the same person. But we were looking at her, well, that's Joanne. And so you have to, and what it will do is it will help you. It doesn't necessarily make it easier. It doesn't make it go away. But it can help you understand, I think, a little better. That can hopefully relieve some frustration. It still can be very overwhelming. That's why, we want to, ask for help when we can. But just some things that we can know and look to see, are they, in pain? Obviously, if somebody's bruised something or cut their knee or finger, you can tell. The next one, overstimulation or boredom. Overstimulation is that going to the party, coming in here when the choir was practicing or something, someone who loved to do choir, and then all of a sudden they're starting to get kind of agitated, or they're finding that they're withdrawing. They're not able to tell you it is too much. So you may want to, the next time you come to choir practice, maybe just know, we're not going to make it the whole 30 minutes. Maybe we'll make it 10. But you know what? That's an accomplishment. That's a goal. They were able to do a social interaction. They were able to do something that they enjoyed doing before. The other one on the opposite end is boredom. That was probably my mom, because unfortunately my dad basically sat her on the couch in front of the TV. It was very obvious he wasn't following along what was happening on the TV, but my dad wouldn't let us get help. It was his way. The TV became the babysitter. And part of, with boredom, even before anybody with getting into Alzheimer's is talking about, and the concern about social isolation. It's one thing I learned with doing my master's is depression can be very prevalent in the senior community. There's obviously a lot going on, for teenagers, college kids, and that pressure. But for the senior population, it ends up being isolation. And like we had talked in previous weeks, sometimes they're withdrawing from participating in an activity because they're starting to realize some of that communication changes going on. So you're, again, trying to find that fine line. You don't want to have them bored, but you also don't want to overstimulate. And then the other thing is, what worked on Monday may not work on Tuesday, and what worked on Monday morning may not work on Monday afternoon. Fear or frustration. If they're fearful, again, like I talked about earlier, that amygdala is still intact. So that fight or flight is still in there, and not knowing what they could be potentially fearful. It could be the unknown. It's going to tie in, we'll talk about anxiety. So we just don't know. And then frustration that they're having, that they're not able to do something that they used to be able to do. And then for my dad, then he would end up taking over for my mom. And then they were, butting heads. But it's kind of that fine line, because you want to still treat them with dignity and respect. You want to try to let the individual do as much as they can for themselves. Obviously, you've got to make sure they're not, in harm's way or anything like that. And again, you have to be patient. They may be able to button their jacket or their sweater. It may take them 10 minutes. So you as the caregiver, as the family member, as the one who's more mentally alert, and as Tippa Snow says, you have to be the one to go to where they are. They are not capable. They are doing the best they can, as so are we. And again, we're entitled to having a bad day. You might have to walk away, but just realize those changes are happening, and we need to try to meet them where they are in the hope that it is less frustration for us. The number of times, God loved my dad, but he got so frustrated with my mother. But I also think it was part of, they were married almost 50 years. Here was this woman who he raised his family with. He was by himself because myself and my brothers were away, and he's living this day in and day out. But he wasn't a patient person to start with, but it just, that I wish, if I could have gone back, we would have definitely have made some changes. Unfamiliar surroundings. That's something I think for any of us that can be, especially for somebody that's, having issues, with that vision can be coming in. They're getting more confused. They're not understanding. It may take trying to tell them. My kids always laugh because I'm constantly telling them what's going on. They're like, Mom, you already told us that. I'm like, yeah, but I'm also running through everything else, and I'm trying to make sure that you know. There are some times where it feels like you're almost treating them like a child in a way, but you're trying to do it in short sentences, kind of direct, let them know, not necessarily go under the assumption that they do know, but to say, hey, Mom, we're going to be going into the grocery store. This was the Harris Teeter that we normally went to, or let's say you ended up going to Publix instead, and you're saying, we're going to the grocery store, but today we're going to go to Publix, trying to give them that information. They may end up asking you over and over, because we'll talk about repetition, is, where are we going? Why are we here? What's that? And you just... it's very hard when you're in the middle of it, but if you can try to figure out strategies for yourself to make it, I think, a little bit easier. And then complicated tasks. If something that they used to be able to do, like my mom used to do cross-stitch, and one time we thought we'd bring it, and that was a disaster. Even trying to have her do larger, like jigsaw puzzle pieces, it turned out just not to be. And it wasn't something that she would say get agitated about. It was just something that she just couldn't do, and it became more of that blank stare with it. So you're trying to find that balance of what is it, some of the activities. And one of the things they'll talk about is maybe, when it comes to doing laundry and that repetition of folding towels or sorting out a pile of laundry. It's kind of like it gives them an activity, and tell them, oh, let's put darks and let's put whites. And I think the big thing is just praising them for what they do. It doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, maybe they even want to put it in the washer, and you can pull the knob out that you're not putting your white shirt in with your red sweater or something, but trying to let them be a part. The big part is not correcting them, just kind of letting them be where they are, because that, again, will help alleviate some of your frustrations. But it's, again, up to us to try to be where they are. And that, too, it's hard when you've got somebody who was able to do all this and now they're not. But you realize, because of those brain changes and whatever the part of the brain that's going on, that's why. All right, so understanding and addressing the behavior, They talk about these 4 things: detect and connect. Trying to figure out what's going on and trying to find a way that you can still connect to your loved one. We'll go into it a little bit more. Address physical needs first. Obviously, we're trying to make sure that they're physically, nobody's in any harm's way. Then try to address the emotional needs. And then reassess and plan for the next time. I think when, you have young children, you figure out what worked and what didn't work. Well, we're playing role reversal, and we're having to do that with our loved one. And it's, again, hard because they're who they are. They did what they did. I think it's natural we do that for our children when they're young. It's hard to think to do that for your loved one. So detect and connect. Join the person in his or her reality. As long as it's nothing, again, that's going to harm them, or, in this world that we're living in with guns, hopefully they're not coming with a gun. There might be. I think that's the situation. There's one thing that says make sure they're out of the house. Just meet them where they are and try to see the world through their eyes, because what they're seeing is obviously different than what we're seeing. But again, that person is still, I think that's the hardest part. That person is still physically here. They are still your loved one. It was still my mom. But it was the realization that she didn't know what was going on. Understand the person's reality and context before intervening. Trying to find out who, what, where, when, how, what took place before, during, or after the behavior took place. So there's no way we know how they're going to react to something, but this is kind of one of those. Make sure they're physically not harmed, and try to look and see, and you end up having to be more observant, visually more observant, more in tune, kind of paying attention, and that's why, too, it ends up you really have to be hands-on with the individual, and then that in turn ends up being so exhausting for the caretaker, where, if you have a one-on-one person, hopefully they're being attentive to that individual, but trying to see what was going on, the who, the what, the where, when, or how, and then approach the person calmly and respectfully. The biggest thing is calmly. My dad, that was not my dad. And then it ended up just being this like yelling match in a way, but I know that a lot of that came from his frustrations. And being respectful. They're not a child. There are times where you feel like you're treating them like a child, but we still need to give them the respect and dignity that they deserve. Address physical needs first. Any medical issues. One thing that they'll talk about is sometimes behaviors will change if somebody has like a UTI going on. And what happens in that case is they're not able to tell you that they're having any burning sensation, or they're having that, because especially if you've got somebody who's in, their adult underwear, you're not going to, unless you're trying to monitor, you're really not going to be able to tell, are they urinating more or are they potentially urinating less, each time that they go. Just physical problems such as hunger or thirst. That's another thing that can end up changing. They may end up that if you ate your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it may end up being that now they need, mini meals, or they need a snack. Part of it is you being able to adjust. You're trying to figure out what's going on, but then you trying to be able to adjust what's going on. And the other part, the lack of social interaction. Again, that's a big piece when it's very hard to have a conversation with somebody who's not able to converse. And if that's all that they're exposed to, there's definitely going to be that lack of social interaction. So it's trying to see, is there an activity that you could bring them to? Is there, music they can listen to, puzzles, something, so it just doesn't end up that computer or that TV end up playing the babysitter. And environmental triggers for discomfort. They may not be able to tell you that they're cold. They may not be able to tell you that they're hot. But that might be something to observe. Just because you're, cold, they may not be cold, or vice versa. It's just, again, things are changing. They're not able to communicate. We're just trying to figure out. And so it's part of that, the way babies, they react the way they are reacting because they're not able to communicate. So that can be some, but just trying to make sure physically that they're okay. Then address the emotional needs. Focus on the person's feelings, not the facts. You're trying to see how they potentially feel about something, with acknowledging if they're frustrated with something, acknowledging that. You don't end up then getting into a conversation of, that's not how it is, or I already told you this, didn't you listen the last time? That's not helping, because part of it, what's happening too, is with some of the brain changes, the way you're hearing, and this I learned 2 weeks ago when I'm doing this Tip of Snow caregiver group on Thursday nights through Zoom, and they talked about the way it's not necessarily your hearing, but it's how you're processing the language. And so sometimes there's a delay in that, and then there's a change in that processing. So it's something else it's very complicated. I'm not trying to overwhelm or scare anybody. We're just trying to kind of educate and let you know some of what could be. Use your knowledge of the person's preference to provide effective interventions. If you know there was something that they didn't like before, they may not necessarily like it there. It may end up being that you find, music is soothing to them. Maybe they have almost like a stuffed animal that's got a dog with long hair or something that almost can be like a calming, mechanism to them, because part of it is they're not able to necessarily put their hand on and tell you what's going on. And as the disease progresses and they communicate less and less, then you're trying to figure things out. But sometimes just, a warm washcloth, or when it's really hot, a cool washcloth around their neck, something that could just help kind of, bring the situation down, and try to redirect the energy into a more soothing activity. If we can be calmer for them, I think it can be calmer for us. Rose's mother has Alzheimer's.
She was part of the family, she'd fold towels, and she'd fold towels all day long some days. Just, put them back in the basket, and then she'd give them to her, here's some more towels. And it made it sound like it's cruel, but look, it kept her busy, it kept her movements going, it kept her, just kept her occupied, and it made her feel wanted and that she was contributing. We created a routine for her that worked for her around her agitation and, her sleep patterns. So every day she was in the same routine for the most part. And every day she did something. She was always in the kitchen every day helping do something. Sometimes she'd rinse dishes. But she was always near the kitchen sink because she spent most of her life in front of the kitchen sink. Now she was just doing it in different ways. And going for a walk, going out in the car for a drive, walking around the yard, watering plants. Those are all things that she did, and we just had her continue doing them.
So thinking about that one, just with them and rinsing the dishes, let them rinse. I mean, obviously when you're having to pay the water bill, but if they end up rinsing them again, let them rinse again, because honestly, in the scheme of life, does it matter if something was rinsed once or twice, or, that type of thing, where my dad in that situation would have gotten frustrated because she would have already rinsed him. But it helps them feel they're part of something. It gives them something to do. And I'm sure deep down, it's almost like that sense of accomplishment, that sense of pride. I got to help somehow, in whatever it is. I wouldn't obviously have them cutting up vegetables or something, but maybe, green beans. Buy lots of green beans and let them snap the ends off the green beans or something. And just kind of go that if it's someone who enjoyed cooking, to be able to see something that they can still end up doing. Trying to understand addressing that. So then you want to reassess and plan for the next time. Go back to detecting and connecting. Join the person's reality. What went well and what didn't. How can you make adjustments? So that's, again, where whatever happened, sometimes you just do the best you can and you deal with it. But when you have time to kind of self-reflect or think, when I see X come up, I'm going to try this strategy. When Y comes up, I'm going to try something like that to see, and then you find other things. And again, information on the website, call our helpline. They can come and give you, obviously everybody's going to respond to different things differently, but when you find something that works, so they get a cool rag, 15 times during the day. I mean, yes, it's a pain to go and wring it out, but if that's something that kind of is bringing them joy and soothing them, then let's do that. Apply these to any behavior. So I know that they're in our book when it's talking about the different behaviors and just being able to do these 4. It's, again, I think very hard to do it when you're in the middle of it, but you have time to reflect back with what's going on. Anxiety or agitation, restlessness or pacing, distress, over-reliance on caregivers. I think for anybody that was somebody who was used to, my guess this probably might apply for women that were used to doing it all, to then they start to realize that they're not able to do it all. What they're recommending, and they were doing this as an example, saying Anne is a 75-year-old woman with Alzheimer's who was pacing the hallways in her house in the evening saying, I need to go. I need to go. She would not stop walking, even for her meals. Her family would give her sandwiches to eat while she was walking. Though she used a cane, she was getting blisters on her feet and had, on her feet and had lost weight from not eating. Her family would ask Anne to sit down, but as soon as she sat, she would immediately get up and start pacing again. Anne had worked for 40 years as a nurse on the night shift, and her agitation began every evening. Her shoes were worn, and she appeared in pain as she walked. So now they're asking us to kind of think about doing our detecting and connecting, trying to listen to the frustration and understand any feelings that Anne's going on. I think that tells a lot that if she was a nurse, most nurses are on their feet. She's probably doing what she's been used to doing. The way is to maybe there's some time that allows her to do that. Then we need to try to figure out what can we do to try to get seated at some point in that. They talk about, checking for sundowning, which obviously, too, if she worked the night shift, she's used to those late. So I think with some of this is it kind of could explain what's going on for her. Then it's trying to assess the situation of what is it that we can do. Obviously, if somebody's walking, we're having to check their feet, make sure, they're wearing good shoes. and make sure. One thing that sometimes people don't think about in their homes is a lot of those area rugs. They're great for decorations, but they're huge falls risk because you've got individuals that are having vision issues, perception issues. I don't think I've done this, but on my tip of snow thing, they talked about like when we're 25, our depth perception is about here. And as we're aging, things are going closer and closer, so we're not able to see as much. As Alzheimer's or dementias can progress, you can go from here to having here to end up becoming binocular vision, and then they call it monocular vision. And they ended up showing us pictures of somebody trying to cross it looked like they could have been in New York City, cross the road in the crossroads with it. And when you see, based on what stage that the disease is, how their vision has changed and what they're able to see. So that's something, in the home, they actually call them environmental gerontologists, can come in and look at the homes and see what are their items that could, if you need to get rid of the rugs, if you need to move tables, if this is someone who does like to walk, to be able to kind of give them some space because that's part of what they were accustomed to doing. You're trying to let them be who they are. It's, again, us having to make those changes. We're also the one who's having to think about what's going on in the situation. Addressing the physical issues, if anything was, physically going on, making sure somebody's not going to get hurt. Then to address the emotional needs, acknowledge that you understand the person is feeling frustrated or upset and that you want to help him or her to become more comfortable. Check to see if something has happened to upset the person or trigger hurt feelings, anger, worry, frustration, loneliness, or other distress. This ends up you trying to become the detective. Try to join the person physically if you can, unless there's something you have to do and they like to walk, then walk with them, because in a way it's getting to connect with them. Instead of wondering, why is mom constantly walking? Be able to join her in it, and that may too end up bringing some calmness to her, that she's going to want to walk, but maybe not having to walk. And a lot of times they talk about too, when they're talking about, I have to go, then you ask them, well, where do you have to go? Oh, I have to go home. And then people will go, oh, well, you already are home. They're not necessarily talking about the house that they're living in now. A lot of times they're talking about something from their childhood or from young adulthood. So then you try to ask, obviously this is somebody in an earlier stage that's able to communicate, then ask them, well, tell me about that. And that can be validating for them. You may end up, even though you've been with this person for 50 years, you may learn something about your loved one that you didn't know with, and don't kind of argue with it or question, or something. But there's, I think, a lot of things of, look what they're doing, what can we do to change, what can we do to join them. It'd be great if, there's a neighbor. I help a gentleman in the mornings who has Parkinson's, and he has a neighbor who comes over and each morning helps walk, and they just walk around the block. And, the man talks more than my Parkinson's patient does, but I think that's good. It's that male bonding that they're doing. He previously was a neighbor, and his wife says it's just such a blessing that he gets that time. So see if there's somebody, if there's grandkids around or something that, a neighbor, a loved one, someone that could come if somebody is that likes to walk. And step 4, reassess and plan for the next time. What kind of worked, what didn't work, and what worked may not necessarily work the next time. So it's that constant, I think, again, go back to thinking about how with your kids sometimes, what isn't that could be. And I think too, it ends up being a disease where we need to try to be in the moment more And I think that's very hard because we've got so much going on, that if we can be able to appreciate, and it's finding that joy again when they go out and looking at all the flowers and things like that, instead of trying to get from A to B, let's go and explore, as long as they're not doing anything to harm themselves. Let them have that opportunity. And what the hope is that doing things to be able to meet them, assess what's going on, figure out what can work next time, it can help bring some calmness. And it could be somebody, more people are prone to anxiety than other people. And, agitation. I think for the agitation, it's really trying to find out, did something different change? And it could be as simple that you decided something different for breakfast, like Rose said. They end up getting on the routine, and it's might be mundane that we're eating waffles every day, but if that's what the individual is used to, then let's, try that. And again, if it's not working, call the helpline and say, I need help. Can you come up with some suggestions? And we'll see what we can do. Just with trying those different things, I think the big one, we're making sure they're physically okay. We try to detect, and you try to reassess. But again, do the best you can. That's all we can do. Confusion or suspicion, not recognizing familiar people, places, or things, accusing others of theft, infidelity, etc. Part of what you have to be careful of too with the confusion is depending on where they are in the disease, so they're not there starting to make you, when we used the example before about the car keys being misplaced, then they start to accuse you of doing that. And I think you just have to realize, okay, don't argue with them. Look to see what's going on with the situation and go. It does get hard if they become more adamant about what's going on. I think part of it is trying to see if you can redirect them. If you can see if there's music you can play, something that could be, go get the cold rags, those things that what. And it's almost like when you go out, and we had to pack our diaper bags, have your bag of goodies that can be done. And it could be for some people, they find, fidgeting with things actually ends up calming them. So it's like what worked at home may be able to work when you're at someplace, depending on where you are. Instead of just going blindly into the doctor's appointment, have something with you that could help to distract them. Detect and connect. What can we do to try to figure out what's going on? Where could the confusion be coming from? The suspicion, was there something? Did they happen to watch something on TV? Did they hear somebody talking about, God forbid, they're watching the news and the crazy of our world, trying to think, could there be something that's coming from? Then try to address their emotional needs and, again, reassess and plan for the next time. Aggression. Aggressive behavior may be verbal or physical. It may occur suddenly for no apparent reason, or may emerge following a trigger. And I can't remember again which part of the brain, but Tippa Snow talks about the part of the brain where those not good words, that apparently goes away towards the end. So you will have somebody that will end up almost starting to say inappropriate things, and you have to try to realize you want to correct them, but it's trying to understand they're not doing it on purpose. It's like when you're a little kid and you said a cuss word and they heard it. Well, now this one is, come out. It can be said. The aggressive behavior with the trigger, that's tying into with your communication. If they're not able to communicate, and there was something that, the sunlight came in, or you may not be able to think about it at that moment, but hopefully you can reflect back. Another thing I think I would do is keep a journal, jot things down. When this happened, we tried this work, or when this, that. Use resources to help come up with ideas that can help you. And what ends up being, there's a lot, and I can bring in, because I have a fair amount of caregiver books. And there's different examples, because, we're a village having to raise a child. We're a village having to help somebody with Alzheimer's. If there's something that worked for somebody else that you haven't thought about, give that a try to be able, and that could potentially, based on what the trigger was, help with the aggressive behavior. The big thing, if it gets physical, is know that like my mama, I think I shared the story, I'll never forget giving her a shower, and she just ended up being like a bear claw and growling like a bear. And it just, whoa. I mean, I remember just standing there and crying, and then calling my brother saying, "You've got to come. Like, I can't deal with this." But it's so emotionally, and I know she didn't mean it towards me. It was the disease talking. It's just very hard to see that. But you have to realize they're not meaning it. They're not understanding. It's part of their way of, when your baby points and grunts, their way of being able to communicate. Just, again, try to detect and connect what's going on, because connecting to that individual, because as the disease progresses, they can typically become more involved in things. And it ended up towards the end, my mom literally was like a bump on the log. Just sitting there, it literally was like, I felt like I could put my hand in front of her face. She had no idea what was going on. And I think even when you're trying to deal with some of these things, if you can connect with them, because in some instances you get to feel like there can't be a connection. But again, it's hard when you're in the middle, making sure nothing's physically is hurting anybody, try to address their emotional needs, reassess and plan. What did we learn from this time? What can we potentially do for the next time? And part of it could be, if you're figuring out if there was a trigger, whatever was going on, try not to have that trigger, before, so that could potentially make them less aggressive. Usually aggressive behaviors are associated with dementia are upsetting but not dangerous, unless obviously and it may end up being, they say, get guns out of the house, keep sharp, knives, objects, anything that they could hurt anybody. Occasionally the person is a danger to themselves or others, and safety measures are necessary. Speak with the person's doctor about medical interventions, and obviously call 911 when help is urgently needed. We don't want anybody to hurt themselves. We don't want anybody to do it. The big thing that they say too is, if you do end up calling 911, make sure you tell the operator, my mom has Alzheimer's, my mom's got Lewy body dementia, so that they're aware. And they're trying to, this dementia-friendly movement, it's Dementia-Friendly America, and there's also, I can't remember, I think it's dementia-friendly hospitals. They're trying to get communities to become more dementia-friendly, to try to understand, so that when you have somebody that's probably in the earlier stages of the disease, you could go to a restaurant. Some of the restaurants will end up being where they could be in a certain section where there's better lighting, there's not as much noise. It's trying to train the staff that it takes them a while longer to make a decision. You may tell them, I was a waitress in college, they tell you the specials, and they're going to ask them, again and again. If it's a dementia-friendly, because there ends up being a sticker that the establishment has, hopefully the staff knows that that's part of the repetitiveness that they're going to ask. But we just want to make sure that nobody is going to hurt themselves or hurt anybody else. Repetition, saying something over and over, repeating words, questions, or behaviors. It may end up being, when you're going through that, you have to step away for a moment, because it's like you can only tell the same story or listen to the same story or say the same thing. But that is very much because again, they're losing that short-term memory that they just said, or you just told them something, it's gone. It's not being the teenage boy that I have who's not listening, it's just gone. And so they will ask. And again, if we can try to meet them, it's very hard. I got to step away for a moment. You're making sure they're doing okay. And you may come back and they're asking the same thing. And I've worked with dementia patients, and the family members are like, how do you do that? But I'm like, you just sit and, yeah, okay, tell me more. You listen to the same thing. I think part of it, I'm invested, but I'm not overly invested in it emotionally, and that's what makes it so hard when people say, she keeps telling me the same thing over and over. She's going to do that.
Repetition is really one of the most common and also frustrating behaviors for caregivers. It's important to really just take a minute, take a breath, and really think about how you could help that person with the answer that they're looking for. It really makes no sense to sort of bump heads with them and try to correct them or try to tell them to stop asking it, because they really can't remember that they just asked you that a minute ago. So thinking about how you could provide an answer that's reassuring, even though you might be doing it over and over and over again.
Try to detect, connect. How can we connect with that individual? Again, if they're repeating something, maybe you can end up asking them more, try to elaborate, add something, different to the conversation. Obviously making sure physically they're not hurt. Then address the emotional needs, and then look to see what potentially worked and what didn't work, in the hope when it happens again. Wandering. 60% of people with dementia will wander, and it can happen at any stage without warning. And that is obviously probably the scariest one. Fortunately, my mom didn't really have that. People have, on doors, put the chimes, if it's similar to like when your child put a chime on the door. I would definitely make sure the individual has one, like you all have your kind of lifeline thing, that happens in case just something. There's things where, with technology now, the GPS scanners or whatever, you're hoping this is never going to happen, but maybe there are things you can do to help prepare in the case that it does. And just to look to see why somebody wanders or some, and I have to wonder too, for some that wandering, could part of that be tied into some of that boredom, that they're not trying to look, and to potentially give them some activity. They may be, I have to, go see my mom. I have to get up and go. Then you can say, okay, yeah, we're going to see your mom, but hey, let's, go into the laundry and do this, or hey, do you want to go have ice cream at 11 a.m. in the morning or something, just to try to distract them from doing it. But I would, if they end up wandering once, there's probably a likelihood they could wander again. And I would just want to be prepared. So a lot of people, I think, end up being in denial about things, but this is one issue. Wandering and driving is one issue that you don't play with, because God forbid something happens. We don't want that. Trying to figure out what could be going on. And, the other thing that could be interesting was just thinking about, like the locks on your door that has the chain. It could end up being that they're almost like fascinated with that chain. Then you could almost end up getting a board that has like locks that they can end up playing with. That stimulation could help deter, if that's what you're looking to see. Hey, she seemed to be, fascinated by that. Then we're toward the end, just contacting us, our alz.org. This got the navigator, the community resources, ALZ Connected. The ALZ Connected, if you go on, then you can get on with other groups of people. The Alzheimer's and Dementia Caregiver Center, Safety Center. Again, the helpline, if you're starting to have safety concerns, I would definitely call. If you can, go on the website first. If you feel like you didn't answer your questions or you have more, call them and ask. ALZ.org, find us, support groups, education programs, and more available in communities nationwide, and then free online training programs. You can actually go on a lot of these programs that I've done that you can end up sitting in your apartments and going through it again. And it may be, because it's so much information, to listen to it again. But hopefully, when these are airing, not that I'm just doing the best I can, but, listen again, because you may, to watch it again, pick up on something that you didn't pick up the first time. And I guess any questions? Oop, Allison's coming with the mic.
Did you mention a name like Tippa Snow?
Oh,
or
yes,
something
Tippa
like-
Snow, Teepa. Her last name is Snow, Snowpa. She's actually in Eflin, which is in Alamance County. She is an occupational therapist by trade, and she's been working with dementia patients for like 40 years. She has something that's called the positive approach to care, and she's really the one. Not that she's the one, but she goes out into communities. Like, she's in Australia now. She's gone down to talk to people down there, trying to talk about what can be done in helping, how can we care for the individual, and, coming to the front, being able to help. Allison, I think she's got another question. But tippasnow.com is her website. Yeah. I did, yeah, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You talked about in your relationship with your mom that if you could turn the clock back, you'd do some things different, like examples.
I think we definitely would have reached out to the Alzheimer's Association. I definitely would have. My father was a thick-headed Irishman, and I would have had said he needed help, because I think I've shared that my mom died, it was 10 years in January, and my dad died that August because his health declined so much. And so I say I lost both parents to Alzheimer's. I would go back and try to insist that he get help, but again, dealing with him. Plus, when my mom died, I had an 8th grader and a kindergartner, and they were outside of Charlotte. So I was 3 hours away, and my brothers, their viewpoint was, because I didn't work, I could handle it. I mean, it was, one of those. So I think but we didn't really know, and that's really what, I was in the business world for years, have been a caregiver for about 12 years, and that's what, made me go back. I became a CNA in 2019, and doing that, I wanted to do more with my education, and that I didn't want to become a nurse, and that's why I got my master's in gerontology, to try to learn more, and that's part of what I'm here to help. I want people to know, because I think knowledge is power, and we just didn't know. I don't think we could have changed anything, but hopefully it could have helped with some of, it was just so emotionally draining, and it was so hard to watch, and it's, even to have known and done things differently, I don't think that would have changed. But I think I would, had we been able to get some help for my dad, I don't know if they'd still be with us, but I don't think he would have, his health would have declined. I mean, when we had my mom's funeral, my father literally looked like a ghost. He was so scared. It just was, it was. And then 3 weeks later, we're in the ER with him about his heart and having stents put in. So it was one of these. I was like, okay, God, what's the plan? So it's, but just, trying. And I think the other thing as caregivers is, if somebody offers to help, let them help. And it could be as simple as, hey, I'm running to the grocery store. Do you need anything? You know what? Let them pick up your milk. Let people, I think we're so proud and we want to say, I can do this all. Let people do it. Or if it ends up that you've got a neighbor that can, they're going to go outside for a walk, let them take your loved one with you. That 15 minutes of just yourself, because the thing I watched on Saturday, one thing was talking about the caregiver, we always take care of ourselves last. And you have to take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of somebody else. And I think being a parent is hard, and I didn't have twins, so I don't know what that's like, but they're going to grow up, where this is a disease that as it's progressing, you hate to say it, it's almost going to get worse, where you're going through the terrible 2s, and then you move to the trying 3s, but then you move on, where this is a disease that it almost, when my mom passed after 5 years, it was a relief. And I hate to say and have that feeling. And I remember after being with her she had moved under hospice care and sat there for, they thought 24 to 48 hours. And we got on to day 5. And I said, my dad, I can't do this anymore. And I remember driving back home, and I was right there on I-85 between Greensboro and Burlington. He called and said, she's gone. I remember looking up and saying, thank you. I mean, it just was exhausting. So I would have probably tried to have done more for my dad, but I think but my dad, when he ended up passing, he told my uncle he was ready to go. He missed my mom. So I don't know. Anybody else? Well, I thank you. Get our information. I'm back on Wednesday night. We're starting new programs. It's not the same programs. We're doing a continuation. The next one is going to be Dementia Conversations. Yes, coming Wednesday night. I've gotten myself a full-time job. Yay! And I'm going to do them Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock.
And this is all in the Gleanings, as well as it'll be going up on Care Merge shortly. So, yes.
Yeah.
So all those dates and times are in the Gleanings.
And the
And on
subject,
Care
because they're all different. The Alzheimer's Association has about 12 different presentations that can be done. And so Allison and I, when we started talking, it was kind of like, which presentations do we think would be the best, for the community be interested in doing? So those why we picked these 8. And I mean, I can come back in April and do the other ones if we need to. We just need to do it at night. So. Oh, sure. It was fun. Have time to go to Boy Scouts now.